to get going on this?
Yep, I'm ready.
Okay, so I guess we'll go ahead and get started. We've got a good turnout of 32 already online. I'm sure more will trickle in as they get connected. So welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I'm happy to be able to welcome you all to what is effectively a Spring 21 kickoff event for the Department of English and Comparative Literature. I'm Philip Serrato. I'm chair of the department. After the winter break and amidst the pandemic and plenty of uncertainty and instability in the world, it's certainly comforting to be able to come together for a little while, albeit virtually, to talk about teaching and learning in literature and our shared investments in such things. Every year, thanks to the generosity of Pitt Warner, our department is able to recognize, with the assistance of a super secret review committee of non-English and comparative literature faculty, one of our own for outstanding innovation and scholarship, teaching, and/or programmatic development. Past winners of this award include Dr. Yetta Howard for archival research into the work of Sherry Rose, Dr. Bill Noricchio for his Mextasy research and curatorial work, Professor Megan Marshall for her ongoing stewardship of the Living Writers series, and a few years back, a certain Dr. Edith Frampton for her integration of theater internships into her teaching. The 2020 winner happens to be, once again, Dr. Edith Frampton. Now, Dr. Frampton is a beloved faculty member, and I'm sure everybody knows this, who has been with our department for over 20 years now. Tirelessly devoted to students and colleagues, she teaches courses in post-colonial literature, British drama, including Shakespeare, and advanced composition. For the second Warner Award, Dr. Frampton is being recognized for pedagogical innovation in online instruction amidst the pandemic. Of her work, the Super Secret Review Committee commented, quote, Dr. Frampton has gone above and beyond in adapting her already ambitious courses to an online format, employing multiple virtual platforms to ensure that students remain connected in a time of disconnection. Noting Dr. Frampton's use of mock TED Talks, online debates, virtual performances, and the creation of a digital archive, the committee concludes Dr. Frampton is a model of pedagogical innovation. Today's Warner Award lecture is titled, after my reassurance to her that it was not too salacious of a title, My Sordid Love Affair with Online Teaching. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Edith Frampton.
Thank you, Philip, for that wonderful introduction and for all those lovely words from the secret committee. And thank you to Kim for your help with organizing this event. And I would be remiss not to thank Katie Waltman and Alan Tan, who make sure that my hardware and software are working, and always Mary Garcia and my other wonderful colleagues who've been so supportive over all of the years. And I want to thank Mabel Aguilera Hubbard and also Jose Miguel Alvarado, my co-speakers today, from whom you'll hear later. And there should be plenty of time at the end of what we have to share for some of you to share your own experiences with online teaching and learning. Thank you all for being here in spite of the stress and struggles and sadness in which we've been submerged for so long. I want to put those things aside a little bit today and focus more on resilience and adaptability and possibility, those wonderful life skills, which are also excellent tools for online teaching and learning, along with a determination never to lose one's sense of humor. I was very honored to be the recipient of the 2020 Pitt and Virginia Warner Innovation Award for my efforts to rapidly bring my classes online when our campus closed. And as Philip mentioned, I decided on the title of this talk in consultation with him in September. And you can imagine my gratitude when cartoonist Adrian Tomina was so accommodating as to create and publish this cover for the New Yorker magazine for the week of December 7th, 2020, which immediately went viral because it resonates with so many of us and perhaps even represents so many of us. In its depiction, I would say, of resilience, adaptability, and possibility. Now, the Department of English and Comparative Literature has a relatively recently inaugurated new course on comics and history. So I'm very confident that there are people in this Zoom session who know a lot more about Adrian Tomina than I myself as a humble fan. But what do you notice here? I'll be interested to hear your thoughts when we're talking later. There of course are all the details, the paraphernalia of the pandemic, the gloves, the masks, the hand sanitizer, and the Amazon boxes, the very happy felines having their person home so much of the time. Of course, there's the remains of takeout food and some important lessons, as we were talking about earlier, to do with positioning of a lamp for the best lighting, positioning of the laptop on top of a stack of books, just as my laptop is currently positioned, phone at the ready for dual authentication, and of course, a beverage, so as not to get parched. There's also Adrian Tomina's own book, published in July of 2020, there on the floor at the bottom of the image. And so, yeah, resilience, possibility, adaptability. Now, you might see other things. And let's look and see what Twitter had to say. All right, so at Madison Kate observes that there needs to be another cat in the Amazon box, but OMG, this cover is perfection. While at V Verite points out virtual communication in the age of COVID-19, appearing controlled and calm while immersed in chaos and uncertainty. And on a different note, at Sleep Talker 3D, from Sleepwalker 3D, we get this position. This is not loving life. This is what depression looks like. This is disgusting and not a way of life that should be celebrated, happy or not, despicable. In other words, sordid. Of course, the gods of COVID-19 are to blame for this situation. Who are these gods of COVID-19? And importantly, are they a singular they or a plural they? One way of thinking about them is perhaps like the god Janus, that two-faced god of thresholds, of doorways, of endings, but also of beginnings. Or perhaps you might prefer the Hindu Trimurti, who is a destroyer, but also a creator and a preserver. And look at how those canines, is it an ox? The flora and the fauna are thriving in this 1910 representation. Well, in terms of the gods of COVID-19, we don't need to say too much about destruction. That's perfectly clear given the latest figures. But creation? Well, how about these headlines? Salmon spawning in Upper Columbia River for first time in more than 80 years. COVID-19 took a bite from US greenhouse gas emissions in 2020. As birth rates fall, animals prowl in our abandoned ghost villages. There's a snowy owl in Central Park for the first time in over a century. Preservation? Well, how about this BBC headline? 5 reasons Biden won. Number 1, COVID, COVID, COVID. However we envision these gods of COVID-19, along with all of their destructive might, they did preserve teaching and learning, and they created my sordid love affair with online teaching, and for that I shall have to be eternally grateful. How did it all begin? Well, let me explain. My pre-COVID commitment to face-to-face teaching and learning was a solid commitment. I had a healthy, happy marriage of 20 years. I saw the classroom space as an irreplaceable temple of learning and communal exploration. Let me show you. Look at those happy faces. This is a group of students from my spring 2019 Shakespeare Comes Alive class who have just finished performing an edited version, fully memorized, fully staged, of Shakespeare's challenging play, Measure for Measure. How could you recreate that online? And then from the fall of 2018, here is a group of my English 508W students and I out in the field experiencing Charles Dickens as performed on the stage at the Signet Theater. How can one create that experience online? And then from the spring of 2018, you're seeing part of a digital archive of a class called Political Shakespeare, Staging the World's Worst Ruler, in which my students and I were considering the historical figure of the medieval king, Richard III, and his political and cultural context, and then Shakespeare's Tudor context and the play that Shakespeare wrote representing that king, Richard III. And then we were talking about and thinking about those things in relation to the political moment in the United States in spring of 2018. So students did research, which was archived on this WordPress site, and the class culminated in a live performance of an hour version of Richard III. And here is a trailer of that production, promoting that production, made by student Alex Hopper. It's narrated by student Lewis Rinn.
Yeah, so today we went through our first full rehearsal of the first half of the play.
So, given experiences such as this, I had only the most thinly veiled disdain for online teaching and learning. If there were no other options, of course, it was fine, but how could any right-minded person actually choose it over the immediacy, the improvisational aspect of the sensory materiality, shall we say, of the classroom experience? In short, yes, I was a hater. I was never going to teach online. It held absolutely no attraction for me. But that all changed. And my COVID-19 love affair with the virtual classroom, unlike most passions, started not with a flirtation. No, no, no. It was with a very rude interruption. We were thrust into one another's company unwillingly, much like Beatrice and Benedict in Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing, for those of you who are familiar with that play. But ever so gradually, I had to admit that an attraction was beginning to develop. For instance, look how well debating turned out to work online. Without further ado, our first debate is focused on loss and gain. Which of the two is most foundational to this novel? Team number one, would you like to make your opening statement for us, please?
Yes, as a member of team number one, we'll go ahead and start off our opening statement by saying that we believe Great Expectations is a novel about profound loss because from its very beginning, from the formation of the novel, from its very first chapter and paragraph, it starts off in a state of loss with Pip standing in front of the graves of his parents and sort of reliving this memory of no longer having this family that he once had. So it starts in a state of loss, and I would argue that the novel's beginning and end are the most important parts of the novel because it's the ones that stick with you the longest. They're the most impactful.
Thank you very much. Opening statement from the opposing side, please.
So while the book is discussing, sorry, I'm trying to get on my notes here. While the book is discussing great losses, it really truly is about what is gained beyond financial success. There are many people that were successful financially, but what we're really looking at for success here is Pip's, new empathy. We're looking at Magwitch's, stray from the criminal life and how he benefits someone else. We're looking at how Havisham turned from the worst and was turning everyone else into the worst to a complete realization or a semi-realization that things should have been different compared to her great expectations, and they didn't happen. But she's watching all of these other people, Pip, Herbert, Magwitch, all of the above that are reaching for their great expectations, that they will find something that is more valuable than financial success at the end of this. So for us, we're really interested in how the lack of financial success for these characters gave them a lot more than what was expected before.
Thank you so much, and you may feel free to take it away however you wish on both sides. And when we had to cancel the collaborative staging of plays, look how well we adapted. I offered students two options. They had been underway working with groups preparing their presentations for the end of the semester when campus closed. And I invited them to either continue to work individually on the same play, or if they chose, to create a TED Talk promoting a future production of the play specifically designed for San Diego post-pandemic. And I suggested they imagine that Mark Zuckerberg had offered $1 million to fund this post-pandemic production and to produce a 10-minute TED Talk in which they would be pitching their production in competition against others. Okay, so now I want to share a couple of examples of those projects. The first is a clip from Jose Miguel Alvarado's TED Talk in which he is pitching All's Well That Ends Well.
And why else make a telenovela based on Shakespeare? Why? Well, first of all, let's pretend already you haven't seen this before, blah, blah, blah. Cast there. Why make this happen? As you can see here, telenovelas are already quite iconic. They ought to be iconic. They're worthy of that status. These two videos were made by Funny and Die, in which they're spoofing, parodying telenovelas by calling them telenovelas are hell. and they produce videos in which they examine each telenovela, saying, why is this a terrible world to live in? So, for instance, you have Marimar, like I just showed you. Her parents are burned alive. She loses her money, and then she becomes a wealthy heiress. And then you have Pasión de Gavilanes. It's three brothers. Their sister dies. They go take revenge on the person they blame for her death. And so people already have these assumptions that their novelas are twisty, weird, funny, over the top. So it would be perfect to have something so lowbrow mixed with something so highbrow and elitist and artsy as Shakespeare, to prove that both can serve and work in the same medium and the same continuum of storytelling and tradition, and have audiences have fun, be amused by what they're looking at, by the story they're paying attention to, and still learn something that maybe villainesses and telenovelas are not evil. You're just empowered women who want what they want and they're gonna get it. And they can learn that being part of your family doesn't mean having to listen to what they all say all the time. You can be independent and still have fun with something that calls back to their families, to their evenings at school or home, watching telenovelas with their abuelitas. So yeah, that is all. Thank you so much. Gracias.
Jose Miguel Alvarado is a senior in his last semester at San Diego State University. He's currently at work on an honors thesis, which is a short story cycle, which he says he hopes will attest, even if humbly so, to what he has learned as an English major and interdisciplinary studies minor. Jose Miguel, what would you like to say about your project for Shakespeare Comes Alive?
Well, first I'd like to say hi and thank you for inviting me and thank you for coming. And I think that our projects, whatever we achieved ultimately, is a testament to what Dr. Frampton introduced throughout the course, such as the concept of happiness coined and pioneered by Emma Smith, that allowed us to be empowered as we were working on the plays and say, we don't have to be intimidated by the text, even though it's blank verse, the allusions are weird or distant, and you need to read 100 books to understand them. But rather, there are so many opportunities throughout the text to make it your own, to adapt into something you recognize, whether it be a telenovela, because I love telenovelas, they're super funny. They're not necessarily like Nobel Prize winning content, but they're definitely interesting to look at and study. And so to be able to reconcile Shakespeare with telenovelas and find that there are so many commonalities between them, such as character types, the naughtiness, and indeed the difficulty of the plots of who's whom, who's marrying whom, why, who hates whom. Those intricacies of ideas and characters and plots correspond to both. And to find that and be able to make something unique out of those two opportunities is very interesting, particularly as an English major. You need to read a lot of books, and sometimes you feel like you're burdened by the weight of the intelligence of a bunch of writers who are dead and whose ideas may not agree with your own. And yet you find something to say that is unique and valuable to yourself, and that you can work on it and make it matter, if to you, then to everyone else. And I think that's something that I at least hope to achieve with my project. And I'd like to thank Dr. Frampton for giving me the opportunity to do that and to talk about that.
Thank you, Jose Miguel. Now let's take a look at Mabel's two clips from her project. She opted to carry on with a production. And I'll show you the first clip, and then Mabel's going to share some thoughts with you before we see the second clip.
Come say your prayers.
What mean you?
If you require a little space for prayer, I grant it, pray. But be not tedious, for the gods are quick of ear, and I am sworn to do my work with haste.
Why will you kill me?
To satisfy my lady.
Why would she have me killed? Now as I can remember by my throat, I never did her hurt in all of my life. I never spake that word, nor did ill turn to any living creature. Believe me, law. I never killed a mouse, nor hurt a fly. I throwed upon a worm against my will, but I wept for it. How have I offended wherein my death might yield her any profit, or my life imply her any danger?
My commission is not to reason of the deed, but do it. I am sworn, and I will dispatch.
That's all. Thank you.
Mabel Aguilera Hubbard is a border crossing student from Tijuana. She graduated in May of 2020 with a BA in English and a certificate in creative editing and publishing. Mabel, what would you like to say about your project?
I would like to also thank everyone for coming, and there's a lot I want to say about this project. I want to say that in high school, I did not like Shakespeare, but when I took Dr. Frampton's Shakespeare class, I was hyped. I was so excited about this production since day one. I was looking forward to the day where we would perform. The day that we got to choose our plays, I was really set on Pericles. I thought it was a very compelling story, and it was a story I was already familiar with. Once we all chose our plays, I got home that same day, ordered a book on Amazon that translated the play into plain English. I read the whole thing that day and then got writing my script. Once I wrote the script, my teammates and I practiced a whole rehearsal twice in a coffee shop. When I thought that we were ready to have this production set, like we were talking costumes, we were talking about producing a backdrop for the play, how we were going to have the classroom set up. So when the pandemic happened, I was pretty devastated, and I really wanted to find a way to make it work, which is why I went through the animation process, because I wanted to see my script in person. I wanted to see it alive. So the first clip, I think what I struggled with was I asked all my friends to send me their recordings. And I asked my friends who don't really know Shakespeare that much. It kind of just sounded like they were talking on the phone about Shakespeare, like they were not passionate about it. And then me editing that, also I didn't really have the technology to do that, so I did it on an app on my phone. So it still wasn't what I had hoped it would be. So I still thought about this project a lot. Like I really wanted to revise it. I had spent so much time on the script, like seeing this script alive is something I really wanted to do. So when Dr. Frampton invited me to this talk, I was like, this is perfect. I get to redo it. So what I decided to do was, instead of doing stop motion and having printed out the pictures and like moving them, I decided to do a comic through PowerPoint. And each bubble, when you click on it, the text comes, and that makes it seem like the person in that image is talking. And I don't know if you had this issue, but when you read a comic and there's a lot of bubbles in the same scene, I feel like sometimes you read it in the wrong order and then you have to reread it to understand what's happening. So by having it pop up the text in the bubble, it makes sense who's talking when. So the whole presentation, the whole play, turned out to be 115 slides, which is 9 minutes in video. And here's that clip of that. And here are the texts that I use, and I decided to go for Marina instead of Pericles because I felt like throughout the play you get to really get to know her better, and I was working with a group of women, so I felt like it made more sense to focus on her. And if you want the link, it's over in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Mabel. So this is her new version that she's been working on since she graduated. It has stuck with her. So with these successes after our campus closed, I knew in my heart I was beginning to drift away from my devotion to face-to-face teaching. The guilt was tremendous, but the allure was even stronger. So in the summer of 2020, I devoted all of my time to researching online teaching and learning, and the seduction began, and this was in part through ITS's Summer Flex Institute and the VFit Center. Special thanks to all those folks in instructional technology services who work so hard to support all of us. And that Summer Institute had 3 major takeaways for me. One had to do with inclusivity, another with accessibility, and the third with specific strategies that I could use. One of which is short videos sent out to students to create a sense of connection. This is something that scholar Michelle Pacansky-Brock in particular argues in favor of. And she says the more informal, the less polished, the better. So this is a welcome video that I created for my fall classes in 2020. Hi, I'm Dr. Edith Frampton, and I'm looking forward to welcoming you into our class in the Department of English and Comparative Literature at San Diego State University on Tuesday, August 25th, live via Zoom by following the link in my email message. This semester is an historic one for San Diego State University in that it's the first time that we'll be teaching and learning almost entirely online. I'm excited for the adventure and for the unexpected places that it will inevitably take us. A syllabus is a living, breathing document in a sense, in that it can morph and change over the course of a semester. But our syllabus in its current version is attached to my email message if you'd like to take a preliminary look at it. We'll be going over it in some detail together during our first class session when any questions that you have can be answered. I've also made available to you certain components of our course website if you'd like to peruse that. I'd like to invite you, if you're so inclined, to prepare one or both of 2 things for our first class session. The first of these is to think of an object that you would be willing and able to share via Zoom with a partner or a couple of classmates that gives insight into who you are and what you care about. The second is to prepare to play a brief round of 2 truths and a lie, again, with a partner or a couple of classmates via Zoom. I hope that the rest of this week goes very well for you, and I look forward to seeing you on Tuesday. And another trick that I learned that helps to promote what's called flipping the classroom, in other words, allowing for more time for discussion in class, is recording lectures that students can watch outside of class in advance of class and embedding a low stakes quiz within the lecture for them to earn some points from as they watch and listen. So here is an example of that. Welcome and thank you for joining me for this session in which we are going to be covering the first chapter following the introductory chapter of Terry Eagleton's book, Literary Theory and Introduction. I have some images that I'd like to share with you as we go through this chapter, as well as some passages that we'll consider from what I asked you to read. So if you could have your book handy, that would be very useful. And voila, the quiz question appears, which in this case you can see asks, in the 2 parts of this lecture, I will be going over the main points of scholar Terry Eagleton's chapter, The Rise of English, in his book, Literary Theory and Introduction. There will be 5 low-stakes quiz questions embedded at certain points in the 2 parts of the lecture, which we'll pause for you to answer before moving on. This is the first of those quiz questions, and so is serving as an example. Please click on all of the following that apply in order to be able to move on in this lecture. And the two questions are, or the two statements, this lecture will cover the chapter, The Rise of English. There will be quiz questions to answer as the lecture proceeds. But my greatest concern, in spite of these various strategies, these different tools, was how to recreate a sense of community that I had been able to establish in the face-to-face classroom. How, in other words, to rebuild that temple. Well, I cannot emphasize strongly enough the value of giving a significant amount of points to students for attendance, for the most important thing in life, showing up, being there. Secondly, I give students points for their contributions to class-wide discussions, because these are helping them to develop skills in public speaking, helping to create a sense of community. And I make this perfectly clear. We talk about it. Thirdly, enticements to keep a camera on throughout class. That makes all the difference if students have their cameras on to create that sense of community. And these correspond to the learning outcome that I have stated on my syllabus: attend and participate orally in the collaborative undertaking that is this class on a weekly basis, working to overcome social anxieties, to help create a sense of community, and to develop a network of potentially long-term friends and colleagues. Another interesting surprise in terms of creating community was the chat stream, that dreaded chat stream. I was terrified of the chat stream in the beginning. It would steal people's attention, it would distract me, and so forth. But what I discovered as time went on is that it presented the opportunity for an invigorating subplot running parallel in tandem with the main plot of the class, like the fascinating marginalia in a well-used book. Apologies if there are any librarians amongst us. So here's an example from my class, Writing, Britain, Empire, and Beyond, English 544 from the fall semester. We were discussing Hanif Qureshi's novel, The Buddha of Suburbia, and you can see there is this interesting dialogue, conversation, in fact, going on in the chat stream. And so I had finally realized that online teaching and learning can create inclusivity, accessibility. It creates, as some have said, a classroom without borders. And a borderless classroom is a far better, more powerful temple. Online teaching and learning has the capability really to humanize and deinstitutionalize teaching and learning. I've gotten to know students' cats and dogs, and I've gotten to know students' babies and snakes and their plants and so forth. They can see my hummingbird nest outside of my window and so forth. So it is indeed possible to create even an additional level of intimacy than one experiences in the face-to-face classroom. Among other things, if people have their cameras on, you see people's faces close up, which isn't possible in the face-to-face classroom. Well, how did students react? Not so badly. In fact, my student evaluations for the fall semester of 2020 were as high or higher than I've ever received. Some of the comments include what I have here on the screen for you. The question was, given the challenges of teaching and learning online, what did you find most valuable about this course and why? One student says it was an overall fun class. She also provided pre-recorded lectures with built-in quizzes, which was helpful in the learning of the content, as well as aiding in staying alert for the lecture. Another student points out we were engaging in a wide range of educating activities, debates, insightful pre-recorded lectures, and an atmosphere that truly felt welcoming. And then there's a comment that really means a lot to me because it gets to the heart of one of my major goals for my students. Prior to this course, I was subscribing to someone else's ideals for the perfect paper, and it made writing anything incredibly challenging. Now I understand that my opinion matters. So the sordid side, well, far too many late night assignations, time sucked away from research and writing, thraldom to my beloved laptop, excess sitting, perhaps the worst, and panicked jealousies were others having a better relationship with online teaching than I was. But in the face of this sordid side of my affair, I ask myself, what would this pandemic have been like without this sordid love affair? What would this pandemic have been like without any online teaching and learning? Eventually, we will all be vaccinated. Will my love affair be over, or will it bloom into the permanence of marriage? I hope that the gods of COVID-19 will look kindly on me, kindly on my affair. They have destroyed so much. Let them now allow for the preservation of what good has paradoxically emerged out of this pandemic. Let creation shine. Let the borderless classroom thrive. Thank you all. And now I'd love to know about how your own love life is going.
Wow, that's a big question there, Dr. Frampton. Thank you so much, Edith, for such a terrific talk, one that just resonates with all of us as students and teachers in so many different ways. So if for all of you now, we have about 15 minutes available for questions that you may have for Dr. Frampton. You can enter your questions in the chat. You can raise your blue Zoom participation hand and we'll be happy to call on you. Looks like we've got a question in the chat from graduate student Sarah. She's asking a really good one, actually. Let me scroll back up so it went by me. Any advice for first-time TAs, for first-time graduate student instructors on how to navigate class discussions?
Yes, I think it's very beneficial to give students time to warm up for discussions. In other words, to allow them to work in small groups. So I would say make use of the Zoom breakout rooms, allow people and give them guidance, right? So students of mine who are here with us can attest that I often present specific questions for people to discuss in small groups for about 10 minutes. And then, well, for one thing, a lot of people feel more comfortable in a small group. There's a lot of anxiety associated with speaking in front of an entire class, even on Zoom, for a number of people. And so allowing people to be in a small group, even if they then later will not speak up in front of the whole group, they've had that chance to speak up. That's so important in a small group, but also having had the chance to practice, then they will be more inclined to speak up. And the example of the debates, again, which my students are familiar with, provides that in a slightly more structured way, presenting students with debate positions and giving them plenty of time to prepare, think about it, and make their point with other group members, so they're not alone. These lightning debates can be a somewhat more structured way of doing the same thing.
So related to those issues of class size and how comfortable students are working in in small groups compared to bigger groups, Christina Chica asked in the chat, she says, hello, Dr. Frampton, thank you for your talk. Can I ask how large your classes are and how you anticipate differences for large classes?
My classes, I'm fortunate to have relatively small classes of about 30 to 40 people. I think the largest class I ever taught was 85 students. So yeah, there are certainly other issues with bigger classes, but I would still use that breakout room tool and break people into smaller groups, because they need that opportunity to talk amongst themselves, even if they can't then all have a chance to speak when the class is together.
Okay, so then as you're describing like what you can do to help students to how you can help to put students at ease so that they'll feel comfortable talking. You know, there's another question in the chat here that actually is a really good one that I'm going to be taking notes on as I look at teaching my class tonight. Sarah Hayes asked in the chat, considering how remote learning limits your ability to read the room, how have you been able to coax more discussion and more freedom of that discussion, thereby avoiding the dreaded Zoom silence? And I suppose you've talked a bit about that, but I wonder about just in the actual moment where you've got these screens in front of you and you're trying to actually have conversation flow, as opposed to, on the one hand, you've given them time in the breakouts or whatever to prepare and have something to share, but then there also is that kind of spontaneous discussion that we have about, text in front of us or ideas that we're engaging. So then how do you manage that, or what do you do to facilitate those conversations?
Well, it's something that one develops over time, the skill of reading a room, whether you are live or whether you're using Zoom. And certainly in the beginning, I had no idea how I would do it. But I would say that just connecting with people, one recommended bit of advice I got was opening up class a little bit early, so that you can have conversations as people come in, talk about things that are extraneous to the coursework, so that people are warmed up and relaxed. And that strategy that I demonstrated of having people for the first class session talk about an object that's important to them, or reflects on who they are, helps us, to begin to get to know one another, and we can converse about those kinds of extraneous things. And I think it's extremely helpful.
Okay, so I have a question now about basically surviving the semester. Semesters can be experienced as very long terms just when we're in person. When we're online, 15 weeks of Zoom classes is quite a burden, not just for students who are in front of their computers, but for faculty. And so, for example, you're talking about all the labor that it required of you to convert from face-to-face into this kind of online mode of delivery. And so then, what you were describing about all the work that you did over the summer and how that kind of carried, there was a kind of a momentum that you developed as you began the fall semester. So all kinds of energy, you're ready to go. Let's do this. Let's make this happen. As you get to week 7, 8, 12, I would imagine a kind of a fatigue sets in for not just for students, but also for you as instructor. So I guess I'm wondering, how did you keep your spirits, or were you able to, how did you keep the spirits of both you and your students up as the semester was progressing, and as those kind of particular weights of being online perhaps were beginning to take a toll on both you and students?
Well, I would say that I structure the syllabus in such a way that it's building towards something. It has a kind of climactic feel to it. And perhaps this has something to do with my background in theater. I think of every semester and every class as a performance that's building, rehearsing towards that finale, which is the concluding final essay or the final project. And so I suppose I myself feel, it's not as though it's repetitive. It's always growing into something bigger and better, and we're always getting to know one another further, and therefore, no, I guess I don't feel that kind of fatigue, and that I would attribute it, to the design of the syllabus as much as anything. But new things get introduced, for instance, the debates that I showed you a snippet of, we don't do those till further on in the semester, right? And then so something new is introduced, and that can be kind of intimidating and scary, and yet students, oddly, they get really involved in it. And I find that sometimes students who have never spoken in class before will speak up in that context, oddly. So I don't know that I've really given you a useful answer
No, I
But
think the answer is that you just you put together a great syllabus. You put together the best syllabus that you can, and you believe in what you're doing, and you trust in that to sustain you and students. And it seems like students definitely were sustained. I mean, there's so many positive comments even just in the chat about your use of breakout rooms and things like that. You had one of the things that you mentioned was that the different kinds of positive feedback that you got in your student evaluations. And so I'm going to spin one of the questions in the chat into one of the questions that we that arises in the student evaluations is like kind of suggestions for improving the course. And so I'm wondering, like, after having the fall 2020 semester where, you taught, this is the first semester of teaching, for the entirety of the semester online, what kinds of lessons do you find yourself taking away from that first experience of a full semester online teaching as you move into now this semester?
well, part of it is just being as prepared as one possibly can be, and having all of the resources available on Canvas. Of course, we were just not only learning to teach online, we were switching over to a whole new learning management system, Canvas rather than Blackboard, which works very differently. Yeah, uploading everything, having things ready to go, and a tool that has been invaluable to me throughout is getting to know my students as quickly as possible. When we were in the face-to-face classroom, which seems like so long ago, I always took photos of my students so that I could make, flashcards and learn their names. And that helps me immeasurably to know exactly who I'm speaking to. So I'm not speaking to just a room full of faces. And so in some ways that's facilitated with working on Zoom and teaching online, because you can, for instance, record classes and you can remind yourself who people are. It's all about, for me, it's always been all about the personal connection. I'm teaching individuals. And so whatever work one can do to learn students' names as early as possible, I think is invaluable. Of course, you have the help on Zoom of people's names appearing to remind you, but I also have students fill out a confidential student data form at the beginning of every semester, in which I ask them, what would you like me to know? Is there anything you'd like me to know, in addition to, other kinds of basics that I ask? And I give them an opportunity to write a very informal written assignment that gives me a sense of, what they choose to write about, what they're interested in. And I ask them if they have, there are things that they feel might get in the way of the class, those kinds of things, so that I have the ability to get to know people on an individual basis.
Yeah, and so we have time for about maybe a question or so, but when you brought up the confidential form, and actually that was the next question I was going to share with you that came from the chat, where somebody was asking about the confidential form and prompt, and they mentioned that, that they thought that was really helpful in creating community. And I suppose it provides not only, insight for you into your students, but also, it provides students with this reassuring sense of having an opportunity to kind of share themselves with you, and to be able to tell you something about them, so that now, the same way that you're saying that you want them to be, you want to be able to experience them as people. Well, students also want to be experienced as people. And so I'm sure they were glad to have the opportunity to present themselves as people to you in ways that maybe, we don't always get when we're face to face, that we might just take for granted perhaps. So great. So any last questions? A last question that we may have, as we are about out of time. There's a whole lot of thanks for this talk, Edith. A lot of gratitude for your sharing your experience. And so I think we are done. I don't see any more questions coming through. So this talk has been recorded, and it will be posted to the English and Comparative Literature departments, different social media platforms, and so you can be on the lookout for that. But do please thank me and join me in thanking Dr. Frampton for such a terrific talk and for all the work that she does. So thank you, Edith.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here with us. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you all for joining us. And I hope you all have a terrific rest of the afternoon and a terrific spring semester. So thank you all. Goodbye.